Okay, this video is going to be from the art book here, Best Christian Art. We're going to be talking about the Romans, and we'll start out with the first picture here. The Romans sort of went through three phases. First they had like a monarchy, then they had a republic, then they had an empire. And this right here was Tarquin, part of the ruling family of the monarchy, who took advantage of this woman Lucretia, and she subsequently informed everybody on what he had done, and then she committed, hara-kiri, okay? So the relevance of showing you that is that helped to overthrow the monarchy and put an end to that phase in Rome. And the people of Rome really did not like monarchies, okay? So they're very big on not wanting monarchies. The other thing about the Roman Republic, like republics in general, are very sort of proud. They do have a strong sense of honor, and this was ingrained into the minds of the young Roman men. This is Horatius defends a bridge. So Rome was about to be sacked by the Etruscans, and Horatius, saw what was happening, and the Roman sort of fix-it men needed a little time to disassemble the bridge so they could prevent the Etruscans from invading Rome and sacking Rome. So Horatius, by himself fought off a bunch of Etruscans and delayed their advance so the bridge could be disassembled. Then Horatius jumped into the water. And this idea of heroic behavior to save the group was ingrained into the minds of the Romans. So the Romans were very brave, sort of noble and soldiery back in their republic phase. Now this painting right here is the Roman Mucius in the presence of the Etruscan king Lars Porsena. So here's the Lars Porsena, Etruscan king, that wants to put Rome under siege and sack them. And this man, Roman Mucius, had snuck into the Etruscan camp, and he had tried to slay Lars Porsena. He mistook one of Lars Porsena's guards for being the king himself, and he slew him. And then they caught him, and when they were ready to, sacrifice him, he didn't care. And he even put his arm over a fire. And he said, go ahead, burn me. I don't care. And if you get rid of me, you know what? There'll be 10 more guys in my spot tomorrow. They're going to get you, Lars. There's no way you could take Rome. And this Lars Porsena was so scared, so impressed, and so scared of the bravery of the young Mucius that he decided, you know what? He's not going to mess with Rome. If they got more guys like this, they're just going to be too hard to handle. And this was sort of the stories that all the young Roman boys heard, to be heroic like these guys. And that's also partly why Rome was so successful, okay? Because they had a lot of brave, young, strong men. Yeah, Mucius said, you will never conquer Rome. And that was the Roman Republic. Very noble and impressive. And we'll follow the tail end of that with men like Julius Caesar and Cicero. Now here's a very famous painting. This is called The Oath of the Horatii by Jacques-Louis David. And this is the neoclassical style of painting. And Jacques-Louis David was the best of the neoclassical style. This painting was made in about 1785. It shows a couple things. They're all making an oath that instead of having the two cities battle head-to-head, destroy their armies and their property and whatnot, they would just have a few men go out and fight each other, sort of the top soldiers of each community. And these brothers took the oath that they would do it to defend their city. They in ancient Rome were selected to fight another group of men, brothers, called the Horatii. And so, on the one hand, I like Jacques-Louis David because he's a magnificent artist. On the other hand, I'm not such a big fan of him because he really wanted the French Rev to happen, back in the 1790s in France, and that was a disaster. But man, is he a magnificent artist. Okay, and this painting was sort of like, he's the prototype, the pinnacle of the neoclassical artist, and this is one of his all-time great paintings. He also has a magnificent painting on Napoleon and some other ones that are really good as well. You can also see the built-in attitude of it. The men are very strong, with straight, strong lines, firm of position, and the women are sad because they're about to lose some of the guys they love. One of the women was engaged to one of the Horatii. So either way, she was going to lose in this whole matter. But it also shows him kind of slumped over, kind of sad, kind of meek, kind of passive. And that was sort of the style and the thinking of ancient Rome and whatnot. And that's a whole other topic for another day. But, okay, now here is another painting characteristic of the attitude of the Roman Republic. And the Roman Republic was sort of, in many ways, a high point of Rome. The empire was a declining phase, a long, slow decline. But the Roman Empire was around longer than any empire has ever been. The combination, the Roman monarchy to the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire was around longer than any single functioning country has been. The Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, a lot of names there. He is the conqueror of Hannibal. Hannibal was a Carthaginian general, and he was the greatest general of those times. He kicked the crap out of Rome time and time again in every open battle. They were all scared to fight him. But actually, the Fabian strategy had sort of put Hannibal down with slow delay tactics in destroying his supply lines. Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus also sort of helped finish off the conquest of Hannibal and Carthage. Okay, but some of the things he did were also examples of the potential nobility of the Romans. So in this case, he's giving freedom to a soldier, in a sense too, because he wants to make another person happy so he can form an allegiance with them. But this was the noble mercy of Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus. A lot of titles there for the great general. Okay, and here's another one, and along the same lines. After the battle, it's been pretty much a standard in all ancient battles that the men were slain, the women were taken advantage of and sold into slavery, the men were sold into slavery too. And the magnanimity, they also called it the continence, of Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, conqueror of Hannibal and the Carthaginians. This painting by Jean Restout, he's a magnificent painter. So anyways, they found the most beautiful woman, and they brought her to Scipio, that was his prize, okay? And you've seen the same pattern in the Trojan War, in the Iliad. Agamemnon had his concubine, as did Achilles. Okay, so she's a trophy, and Scipio finds out that she is engaged, and their fiancé is still alive. So here's her fiancé, here's the woman, and Scipio, to show his magnanimity, he gives the girl back intact, back to her fiancé. And this was also good, it's teaching men how they should behave, rather than behaving like barbarian, savage animals. And it's also Rome trying to show off how great it is, sort of like the attitude of, you should be lucky and grateful that we conquered you, or something like that. But still, what I like about it is this idea of the Republic was noble, something special, something good. Okay, now don't get me wrong, I think that I love the ancient Greeks in comparison with the Romans. And these were some of their heydays, some of the Roman Republic. I love all this stuff too. The martial virtues are good for a country to have them. But we'll see some more stuff of Rome. And now here's Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar was a genius. Will Durant had described him the greatest general among a nation of generals. And he was a genius. His commentaries are brilliant. And, Caesar conquered the Gauls, and this is Vercingetorix. He was the great leader of the Gauls, and he was a great man, okay? And Caesar conquered them. He had to surrender. And eventually, though, he paraded them in the streets as, a war trophy prize. And eventually, they had him sent in prison and killed him, which I thought was kind of cruel and pathetic. When Caesar went back to Rome, because people were jealous of him, he went back with his legions. When he turned around to cross the Rubicon, he said the die is cast, meaning a fait accompli. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. We can't change it now. Caesar was a very confident guy. One of his famous sayings is Vini Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Okay, another good quote from him. Men are quick to believe what they wish to be true. Experience is the teacher of all things. Beware the Ides of March, et tu, Brute. Okay, so anyways, Julius Caesar was a pretty impressive guy. He was rather brutal. I mean, he killed, I don't know how, like a million Gauls or something. Brutal, all right? But brilliant general. And he was also very jealous of Alexander the Great. He like was, I forget how old he was, maybe in his 30s, and he was like crying because he's like, by my age, Alexander the Great had almost conquered the entire known world, and what have I done so far? What have I done? Okay, here is a painting of Julius Caesar, falling in love with Cleopatra. Cleopatra was very beautiful, very intelligent woman, very seductive, obviously. So she was able to seduce Julius Caesar, and later she would seduce Mark Antony, a later leader of Rome. Now here's one of the paintings. There's a couple good paintings of this. The Death of Caesar at the hands of Brutus and Cassius. Okay, by the painter's name is Camucci. So, kind of a sad event. As far as Dante was concerned, this is one of the greatest tragedies ever in the history of mankind. The betrayal of Caesar. Okay, and he had Brutus and Cassius in the mouths of the devils. Okay, and also the guy who killed Christ. Okay, so in Dante's book, this is one of the worst things that ever happened in the history of the world. And it was also partly an end to the destruction of the Republic. And they feared that Caesar himself wanted to be crowned an emperor, and that also was destroying the Republic. So in a sense, Brutus and Cassius, in their own way, in a sense, were trying to protect the Republic in that sense. But it's always more complicated than it sounds. And everybody tends to read Julius Caesar their freshman year of high school before they're ready for it. My favorite part, though, is the great speech of Mark Antony. I hope I got a painting of that. I don't know if I got a painting of that. No, I don't think I do. I wish I did. I didn't get all my paintings in here. And initially, I could only make this book a certain number of pages. 590 pages was my limit that I was allowed to make it, because I could have made it a lot longer. But I basically put all the best I could into a book up to that many pages. Formatting the pictures was the big challenge. Okay, now here's Cicero's speech in Rome. Cicero is considered the greatest orator of the Romans. He's considered the greatest Roman who ever lived. He was a great genius. He came from relatively humble means to become the leader of all Rome, okay? And he's right at the transition point between the Roman Republic before Augustus is going to come in and make it into an empire. And if you read Cicero, I've read a couple books about him. He was an absolutely brilliant speaker, incredibly persuasive. He had all kinds of little tricks. He was a lawyer by trade, and then became a politician after that. And he was absolutely brilliant, kind of ruthless, but also good in a lot of ways too. He went and studied all the philosophy and the writings of the ancient Greeks. He was a super educated guy. There's a lot of good things about Cicero. So here's one speech in Rome, this one by Schmidt. Okay, now here's another real famous one. This is Cicero denouncing Catiline. So Catiline was a man who he thought was trying to overthrow Rome, and there's controversy about that. Some people think he was unfair to Catiline, and actually Cicero got in trouble for his cruelty to Catiline, and Cicero himself was exiled from Rome for a while. Here's some quotes by Cicero. "The republic we inherited, it was like a beautiful painting whose colors were already fading with age. But our own time not only has neglected to freshen it, the painting, by renewing the original colors, but it has not even bothered to preserve its forms and outlines. What now is left of the ancient customs on which the Commonwealth, the Republic of Rome, was firmly founded? They have been so utterly buried in oblivion that not only are they no longer practiced, but they are forgotten." Okay, now does that sound familiar? That's like what's happening in the United States too. They've forgotten the founding fathers, okay? And you're falling like a bunch of chumps for all this modern psyop crap. Turn you into a bunch of gaslight chumps. Okay, anyways, Cicero continues. "What now is left of the ancient customs on which the Commonwealth of Rome was firmly founded? They have been so utterly buried in oblivion that they are no longer practiced but are forgotten." Okay, another quote by him. "Res ipsa loquitur." The thing or the facts, they speak for themselves. "Our minds have an insatiable desire to know the truth. Rhetoric is speech designed to persuade." So the highest thing you could be was a great speaker in the ancient Roman days, okay? So they spent a long time training. Another guy named Quintilian, who was a big fan of Cicero, had a school for orators, and he wrote a book about his oration. I read that book too, and it was quite good. Cicero, though, was an incredible speaker. Incredible. Here's Cicero's advice. Read at every weight. Read at all hours. Read with leisure. Read as one goes in. Read as one goeth out. The task of the educated mind is simply put. Read to lead. Readers are leaders. Okay? And, the Romans had their libraries, and, one sign of a noble aristocrat, high status, was to have a library in one's home. Cicero continues, nothing is so unbelievable that oratory cannot make it acceptable. Another famous quote by Cicero, cui bono, who benefits? A lot of times when you want to see who's behind something, who benefits? They're the ones that are pushing it. Okay, Cicero continues, the best way to convince others is to first convince yourself. He is the best orator who teaches and delights and moves the minds of his hearers. And then when he's criticizing a junior orator, he says, did you slap your thigh or at least stamp your foot? No, in fact, so far from touching my feelings, I could scarce refrain from going to sleep then and there. Humans are fundamentally ruled by their emotions. He had all kinds of tricks for stirring up emotions in the jury, in the audience, okay? Okay, the orator has three functions, to teach, to please, and to move, okay? And it's kind of like Voltaire's quote, it is not enough to explain, one must also seduce. So to be a good speaker, the great speakers make it an emotional event. Okay, Cicero continues, emotion is the most important thing. Emotion is the most important thing. Rhyme is a magnet for the ear. Make a rhyme for a key part of your presentation. And all you got to do is look at the O.J. Simpson with Johnny Cochran, that trial. And what does he say? If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. And that's like one of the few things that people remember from that. What was that? How many years ago was that? Okay, Cicero also says, repetition of key points gets the audience to believe it. Whatever it is, the more you repeat it, the more they believe it. Yep, that's another point too. That's like with all the public chumps, you just repeat some gaslight slogan and they believe it. Okay, Cicero continues, friendship doubles our joy and halves our grief. He lived from 100 to 43 BC. Excuse me. Okay, here's a painting of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And Caesar had really criticized Mark Antony a lot, and that made Mark Antony hate Cicero, and he later came back and got revenge on Cicero. Mark Antony also fell in love with Cleopatra, and you want to talk about somebody who was pee-whipped. Mark Antony is one of the most pee-whipped leaders ever in the history of the world, and he basically made a fool and a chump out of himself. Okay. Interesting story. All young men should know that story because it'll help them not to be chumps. Okay, so then there later was the battle between, so after Julius Caesar was killed by Brutus and Cassius, there was then the question of succession. Who was going to be the new leader of Rome? One faction was Mark Antony, and then there was Octavian Caesar, who later became Augustus, adopted by Julius Caesar. And there was a battle of Actium, and basically Mark Antony sort of paid more attention to Cleopatra than he did to his own men, his own seamen, and that was contributed to him losing that battle. And things did not go well for him after that. And Augustus Caesar took over, Octavian Caesar. And here's a great statue of him. And Octavian was a super smart guy. He knew how to rule Rome. He basically let people keep their titles and keep the names of things, but he just took all the power, largely ruling things behind scenes, sort of the deeper control, if you will. But he was running the show. He was basically like a king, but he did things in a diplomatic way that people were still happy and felt more independent than they really were. Okay, another very nice statue there. Okay, and then there is the story of Aeneas, okay, written by Virgil. And this was to write the history of Rome. And of course, some of it's apocryphal, and Virgil put it all together, but he was connecting the Romans to the ancient Trojans, sort of giving them a noble sense of their own history. And Aeneas fled burning Troy, okay? He helped carry his father out of burning Troy. I think I showed you that painting earlier. It's an all-time classic painting, classic moment in history. The idea of the young man, the son, carries his father's history, traditions, knowledge, and education on with him, and later gives it to his son, and it passes along through the generations. Okay, and he stopped for a while in what was then Carthage, and he met Dido, and it was a beautiful love story. Okay, I can remember reading this when I was a freshman in college. They had a class at Stanford called, Western Civilization, and I can remember it. I had not read the Iliad before. I had not read the Odyssey. I had not read any of this stuff, or the Aeneid, and so I remember reading this, and they'd fallen in love, but duty calls, and Aeneas had to go on. He had to leave Dido in Carthage and go on to found Rome. And it broke her heart, and she committed suicide, and it was so sad. I remember being sad at that time. Not many things moved me as a young macho wrestler guy, but I remember how sad this was, because she genuinely loved the guy, and he loved her too, but he loved his sense of duty and his destiny more, and he deserted her. I thought it was kind of cruel, but anyways. Now here is Virgil reading the Aeneid to Augustus and his wife Octavia, and she had lost a son, and a part of the story was reminiscent of what had happened to her son, so she was extremely sad and like fainted at that moment. But this is all the history of Western civilization. You want to look at the greatest book of the ancient Greeks, sort of the story is the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Idiot and the Oddity, and the greatest of the Romans was the Aeneid. Okay, and it is a rather spectacular book. It's not as sort of wild and crazy as the Greek stuff, but it's pretty interesting in its own way. Okay. Other things people can read is Cicero's quotes. Cicero has the best quotes of any of the Romans. He was the smartest of the Romans. The Greeks had a whole bunch of really smart, literate people. The Romans had a few. Okay, so anyways, here's a painting called The Chariot Race by Jean-Léon Gerome. And the way I'm doing this is I'm reading from the book. Okay, so from the book, I had to format these pictures so they will fit in the page size. Okay, if I was given a slideshow talk, I could show these paintings bigger. And if you see them, if you see them on the internet, and you got a big computer, you can see them more higher resolution. These are really the masterpieces. And the Chariot Race is a pretty cool thing. And the greatest movie with a chariot race in it is Ben-Hur. If you want to see a great movie about the ancient Romans and the early Christians, check out Ben-Hur. It's magnificent. Charlton Heston is a star, and it's an awesome movie. Okay. I think Charlton Heston is probably the greatest American actor of all time, because you see, what was he in? He's in Ten Commandments. He's in Ben-Hur, and he was in El Cid. He was in a whole bunch of great movies. Planet of the Apes. All right, so now here, let's take a look at the next painting here. This painter, Lawrence Alma Tadema, he painted a whole bunch of scenes of ancient Rome. Okay, and it's just, it's spectacular. The Colosseum, full of people. It's actually a beautiful sight. And Rome was rich because they had their conquest and their taxes from all these nations they had conquered. They ruled the world for a long time. And the paintings are beautiful. Okay, so nice things could happen in the Colosseum with acrobats. But there was also the sad story of, the gladiators, rather brutal. And, this one is thumbs down from the audience there, and perhaps from the emperor as well. So this one by Jean-Léon Gerome, the French painter. He's a great painter. He painted a lot of classical scenes. By classical, I mean the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans. It's a very famous painting. That was on the cover of the Neurosurgery Journal. That's where I first learned about it. Okay, now here is Arminius. Arminius was a German barbarian tribal leader, and he was a badass. And the Romans were used to kicking everybody's butt, and nobody could stand up to the Romans. They had the best army, the Roman legions, and everywhere they went, they just dominated people. And one of their things was divide and conquer. They'd get different city-states to be quarreling or fighting with each other, and then they would just join the side of one and conquer the other one, and then do the same thing all over again, and just stepwise conquer all these different little city-states. But they couldn't conquer the Germans. And Arminius in particular, he had been a soldier in the Roman army for a while, so he knew the Roman army tactics. He knew how they thought, he knew how they fought, and basically he knew nobody could stand up to them in an open field. So he drew them into Teutoburg Forest, and his men were ready, and they just kicked the crap the Romans. They were led by Varus as a general, and the Germans just crushed them under Arminius. Okay, here's a painting of Arminius with his wife, Thusnelda. There's also interesting stories about her before the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. Okay, so he was one of the all-time greatest heroes of the peoples that stood up to the ancient Romans and were not conquered by the ancient Romans. And there's all kinds of follow-up information about them. They made statues of him and all this other stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you some stuff about this is the last day of Pompeii. The volcano, Mount Vesuvius, erupted, and it came down upon Pompeii. And Pompeii was kind of interesting. I've heard interesting things about Pompeii, that it was a little bit of a scandalous type city. It was a little bit of a Sodom and Gomorrah in some ways. And some people say this was punishment for their sins, that this was a follow-up to Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. This painting itself by Karl Bryullov, I think he's a Russian painter. And the Russians, like I said, used to be good at painting before they went, commie in the 1900s. All right, and it's a rather spectacular painting, and it totally reminds me of Burning Troy when Aeneas carried his father Anchises out. And this one, I don't know the name of the soldier or the father here, but you can see it's exactly the same type of idea. And it's just a masterpiece. All the complexity of the people in the scene, it's an awesome painting. Okay, now here is one of the later emperors of Rome. This is Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius, here he is on his horse, is called the equestrian statue in Rome. And he's considered one of the better emperors. He was very philosophical. He wrote a book called Meditations, all about really Stoic philosophy. He's one of the co-inventors of Stoic philosophy. And he was a noble guy. He was the early emperor in the movie Gladiator, the one with Russell Crowe, and that is a great movie. His son, really probably not his real son, maybe a cuckolded son, was Commodus. And Commodus was a bad emperor, but you'd have to see the movie to know all the details of that. So anyways, my favorite quote from Marcus Aurelius is, "A man should be like a cliff, and all day long the waves hit against the cliff, but the cliff is not moved." And that reminded me, I saw some really good emergency room doctors, and they would deal with intense, really sad, complex situations. And as soon as they were done, no emotion whatsoever, walk in the next room and deal with something potentially similar all over again. That they could just keep it cool. And I like Aristotle's quote, the first step before an intelligent conversation is to remove emotions. So the other great Stoic was Epictetus, and basically said, don't bother your head with the things you can't change, just focus on what you can change. So Stoicism makes people stronger, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn also said the same thing. Stoicism and Christianity are good for physical and mental health, and that is true. So anyways, there's the great Marcus Aurelius. I actually think of that quote, like when I'm dealing with a bad day and I'm dealing with all kinds of headaches, I just want to get my work done and go home, and all kinds of unfortunate, stupid things are delaying me from going home. I just have to deal with them. I don't get upset. I don't say anything to anybody. I just deal with them, get it all done, and go home. It's the way it is. Okay, The Romans in Their Decadence by Thomas Couture. Okay, so the Romans became quite decadent when they had some really bad emperors in the days after Augustus. One of the really bad emperors was Caligula. He took his horse and had his horse be in the Senate, and so the joke was, why did Caligula put his horse in the Senate? And he goes, because he wanted things to be stable. Okay, but another really bad emperor was Nero. We're going to talk more about Nero later, but Nero was so bad. He was like, Satan. He was like Stalin. He was just the worst. All right, but anyway, you get the sense of this, the decadence of this painting here. Okay, and then also they had lead in their pipes. The word plum, plumism comes from lead in pipes, and that causes dementia, stupidity. Okay. Here is the pantheon. Pan means all. Theon means theo means gods. So the temple to all gods, the pantheon. And a rather magnificent building, kind of, and it has a oculus where the light comes in. So rather about, one of the high points of Roman architecture right here. Okay, here's another painting by Jean-Léon Gerome, 1854, and it symbolizes to me also America in 2024. Basically, here you have the Christ child being born, okay, on one side of the scene. And then up in here you have the Emperor Augustus, Emperor of Rome. And it sort of symbolizes the two directions it could go. Because the Roman Empire, even though there's some high points and some good things, it's largely brutal, okay? There's tons and tons and tons of slaves. Evil emperors like Nero would just, bump people off left and right. Nero, for example, would do things called a pearl hunt. Like if he thought a woman was pretty, he would send a bunch of his soldiers to just go and kill the family and take the girl for him. Okay, that's called a pearl hunt. Okay, and he did other things like that. Nero, zero morals, no belief. He believed that he himself was a god, thus he could do whatever he wanted to the people. They're just like farm animals that he owned. And I just finished reading the book Quo Vadis. I had saw the movie and done a movie review about it. I'll do a book review separate about it. It's a magnificent book. It's one of the top 4 or 5 novels of all time. It's a magnificent book. Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz. It's a Polish author. And it basically does this too. It contrasts the Roman Empire with early Christianity. And I'll tell you, Christianity is the friend of the little guy. It says we're all equal in the eyes of God, okay? And that we should be nice to each other. We should forgive each other. It protects the little guy. And the contrast of it in Quo Vadis is so strong. It's incredible. You just see these evil, cruel emperors and Romans versus the Christians. There's no comparison. So anyways, this is kind of like the way things are going to go. They're either going to, choose door number 1, slavery and brutality, or you're going to choose door number 2, forgiveness, kindness, benefit of the doubt, helping each other, and all this stuff. I think I'll take door number 2. Oh, here's a great song that I love. It's called "O God of Earth and Altar, Bow Down and Hear Our Cry." It was from a poem written by G.K. Chesterton. Iron Maiden made a song about that. This guy, Tim Bouchon, I think, has the best version of the song. O God of earth and altar, bow down and hear our cry. Our earthly rulers falter. My people drift and die. It's awesome stuff. Okay. Oh, and that's it. So the next thing will be into the birth of Christ. And I guess that was a good one to end on. So that is the paintings of the Romans. I hope that was interesting.